Welcome to Misbehavior, the podcast for college student conduct professionals. I'm Colette.
And I'm Kurt.
And we're your hosts. And today we have an amazing guest, Kevin McGloin. Welcome, Kevin. You're our first former student.
So nice to meet you.
You as well. Great to be here.
We want guests to have an opportunity to introduce themselves so you can tell the world whatever you want them to know or not know about you.
Okay. Well, I'll start with the former student part. I went to Franklin and Marshall College, graduated in 2020. And Colette, when did you take over as Dean of Students there?
2008.
Okay. All right. So my junior year, and then I was president of a fraternity starting in 2018. And I think, we might have been up to some naughty things. And, Colette's good at her job, so she caught it right away. So that was our first introduction to each other. Since then, we've kept in touch. I do stand-up comedy and also work an office job doing tech sales. But Colette's been to a couple shows since we've graduated. Also stayed in touch throughout what we'll talk about later. But I think that's the general gist of where I'm at.
I would legitimately call myself a fan of Kevin McGloin, the public figure, and the person too.
Well, I appreciate that.
What's your comedy genre, if I can ask?
Yeah, so I think for one, in your first handful of years doing stand-up, you're just trying to figure out how to not bomb, right?
Okay.
And you are learning the technical side of just how to structure, a joke. Then you're trying to find your voice and be more authentic on stage, and then you can try storytelling, ranting about something, kind of more complex things. So actively trying to figure out what my voice is, what my genre is. But I think to start, right, you want to talk about what you know. So the easiest stuff, I'm mixed race. I'm half Korean and half Irish. So, there was some material around that. And I think just kind of race topics kind of being in my mind. Mm-hmm. Kind of touch on that stuff. That was kind of the early, kind of first, jokes and such. But since then, I love topical humor, kind of talking about what's, going on today, since it's kind of just easy to catch people's attention, with that. But I really just try to talk about my life, making things personal. That's kind of the comedy, I look up to and what resonates with me. Can appreciate different styles, but, for me, I kind of like the things that sound most authentic, especially from, the person that I'm watching.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Kevin, I don't know if you know, I work for Emerson College now in Boston, on Zoom. I'm still in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, but one of our famous alums is Bill Burr.
Yeah, I heard that.
You remind me a little bit of Bill Burr, not necessarily style-wise, but you're both really smart, and you are able to deliver very edgy stuff. You can't do that without being really smart and having your writing really sharply crafted. So I wanted to tell you that I hold you up as a future him.
Oh, wow. Big shoes to fill there. But I really appreciate that. He was one of my favorites, growing up early on. And yeah, I mean, he's probably my top three, all time. So you watch these people, you try not to do too much of an imitation. You want to take the good things. Mm-hmm. It comes back to that authenticity thing. Mm-hmm. But, you do have a hard time not trying to, emulate some of your idols there. But I appreciate that. That's, that's the goal one day. I don't know if we'll get there, right? That's, there's a lot of, a lot of work, but also a lot of, luck involved. But no, he's great.
You're putting in the work and to work full time.
Yeah.
I'm guessing you're just writing all the time and
not enough.
Trying to get stage time.
Yeah.
So our origin story for me goes back. I don't know if you remember this, but it was a building on our campus called Ospagod. Mm-hmm. Where you were the new president of the fraternity. And you and maybe a couple other of the new officers came in with your advisor, Beth, to talk to the director of fraternity and sorority life and me to see about whether we could loosen up some, I don't know, here's one of those already keep me honest, there were some policies that had been imposed on your chapter that other chapters didn't have to abide by.
Yeah, so at that time there was I don't know if mandate is the right word, but some sort of policy where fraternities had to hire third-party security for their parties. And then I think it was something where if you were in good standing, you only had to do that a certain percentage of the time. And then other times you didn't have to have them there. I think because of previous events from years prior, we were put in a category where we had to have them there every time. So I think we were kind of arguing like, hey, we've been good for, X amount of time. Can we kind of be in the category, that the other fraternities are in? That's my recollection of it.
I liked you, and I found you authentic, and I got to see how you were treated in that meeting, which I think was the context for a lot of what was going on. And I can't remember, did we loosen up the policy? Do you even remember?
You actually did, and, I think what we ended up getting in trouble for, which we'll go into in a little bit, actually didn't have to do with, those events, right? So, but you guys did you did loosen up and, I guess, put us in that, category with, everyone else. But, yeah, that's what I remember.
So then I guess the next chapter is your chapter got caught hazing. Somebody came in my office and pretty much said, there's no question. And we had to walk over to the house and find the stuff. I remember you were sitting in the living room of the house eating dinner, and it was just sad.
Well, so here's how this night went down for me. I was with two of my friends that were also in the fraternity. We were at a place called Moe's. It's kind of like a Chipotle alternative. Chipotle's better, even though I'm not a big Chipotle fan. Moe's not great, but we were there. And I start getting a ton of phone calls from people, I guess, that were in the house as this was starting. And I didn't know what it was going to be about. I was just like, what happened now? Did the fire alarm go off? Because, as the president of the fraternity, it's, I guess, the perception of it from the outside is that you're, they might think it's like Animal House, or you're like king of the parties and all of that. Really what you're doing is just babysitting. It's a job where they typically, it's a responsible person that can kind of, put out a lot of these fires. And so I thought it was just more of, this nonsense. And I think there was some stuff prior to that I was already kind of annoyed or stressed out by. So I got that call. I finally picked it up. This person was in panic about what was going on. And I was like, all right, well, time to drive home now. I got dropped off by my two friends, came into the house, and there was a public safety, officer. I think the searching throughout the house had already happened. So I was kind of just, told to sit on the couch. And, funny enough, at least looking back now, I remember I put my food away in my room, and I asked the public safety officer, can I go eat it now? Because I was like, am I going to spend the night in jail? Let me make sure I have a full stomach so I don't have to eat you hear stories about a nasty jail cell sandwich they give you. So I was like, let me fill up here.
Wow, is that... I didn't know that. That's what you were thinking. You were really quiet. I don't think you made eye contact when I came in, and yeah, that's pretty terrifying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. Sure.
I was just going to ask from a context standpoint. To me, it seems unusual to have public safety involved. So what kind of hazing are you allowed to say? What are we talking about?
Yeah, so I think before getting into that, I think maybe Colette, you could talk about your walk to the house with them, kind of what you knew coming into that, what led you there. And then I wasn't there when you guys came in or knocked on the door. I have the perspective of some people that called me when it was happening, so I can share that. But yeah, I guess, Colette, before we get into, maybe we go into what you thought you knew I could talk about that side, and then we can get into like what actually, was uncovered.
I think we had a witness who may have been like a secondhand person who had a pretty credible story about calisthenics, some servitude stuff, like that the new not yet brothers had to wear matching outfits and carry a bag where they always had some snuff or cigarettes or gum or whatever the older guys would want at any minute. You had to be able to produce it. But then the scary and dangerous, more dangerous stuff was alumni behavior. That there was a particular alum that would come into the house unannounced and harass, scare, make people do exercises. He would do cocaine in the house in front of them. And now there's a mythology about all this stuff like that is crazy, but those were true things. Making some of the younger guys chauffeur the older guys, or I think the older guys were supposed to go to a mandatory training, and they sent the younger guys instead in their place. Yeah, so
No. So that's, I guess, just wanted to kind of know what at least you guys knew or thought you knew going into that, what led you there. So I guess from there, it was you, what was his title? Director of Fraternity and Sorority Life? Was that what it was? Okay, and then a public safety officer or two? Or was it one?
Oh, yeah. I don't remember.
Okay.
At least one.
At least one. Okay, and then the call and what I was told was there was some banging on the door, and kind of a request to be let in. And then I assume they let them in. Maybe some people tried to hide certain things. Some rooms were checked. Unfortunately, and I'm not justifying any of this stuff. We're way past this, but this is just what I heard from their perspective. There was somebody in their room, and they were kind of a little scared about what was going on. Mm-hmm. And they, I was told that the lock was kind of broken. They kind of pushed and barged right through the door. Oh. So I heard all these things. So I didn't see any of that. And then I got back, and I believe after or when you guys all left, you brought some of the younger guys to an office with you. And then maybe another younger guy who might not have been there at the time eventually was there. That's a small detail, but I think everybody was brought there to kind of, be asked some questions about, what was going on and all of that. So I guess, do we want to get into what was really happening? Maybe not that night, but just in general?
Yeah. And I think that night, your members were pretty forthcoming mm-hmm. and helpful. So I sat with the students that were waiting for their turn to be interviewed, and it was hard. A guy had basketball practice, and he was missing practice, and other people needed to study. It's a hard school. They had mm-hmm. assignments and exams to get ready for, but the interviews yielded confirmation of most of the stuff.
Yeah. So the things that you mentioned all turned out to be true. I don't know how much we want to get into detail, but yeah, it was a lot of calisthenics based stuff. It was really kind of designed we all had to kind of, and this is when I was doing it, had to answer questions about knowledge of the fraternity and the history and all of that. And then if you got questions wrong, everyone was doing push-ups or planks, things like that. Of course, with, some verbal, I don't know what you would call it, but, verbal putting down, right?
Yep.
And to my understanding, some of this stuff stemmed from decades before, after either people were in the army or Vietnam or saw movies about this stuff. And so like a lot of these like lineups that they would be called, it was kind of like a poor imitation of some like military kind of things. So there was that component, and then yeah, there were some alumni would come back. It wasn't as widespread as maybe some people thought, where it was like every alumni is coming back and doing this. There were a select few that maybe were stuck in the past and kind of wanted to relive this for whatever reason. And then, yeah, they might have had some cocaine on them during that. In terms of some of the, I don't know if Colette, you use the word lore or other things, but, from that, how especially small school, rumors like to spread, right? And so, I heard crazy things about like, the fraternity dues could be paid in cocaine. There was mountains of cocaine everywhere, just stuff like that, where it was just like, this wasn't Scarface.
And it was interesting because the chapter was pretty proud that there wasn't a lot of substance use on the students' end. I think the hard one to hear about was there was a traditional dinner at the beginning of the initiation process where all the new guys would get dressed in their jackets and ties and eat this big lasagna dinner, not knowing that at the end of the dinner, the older guys would produce alcohol and then make them drink until they threw up. But then they would say, this is the only time that we will ever do this because we had a brother in our past who died.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so we don't like having alcohol in our stuff. But tonight, that was a hard one.
Yeah, no, for sure. So, and, at the time, explaining this to not just you, but other folks like this night, because on the surface, it sounds bad. It is bad, right? But it just sounds like it was just the surface is just forcing people to drink, right? Which, in a way, it was. But the premise of it, in whatever kind of young, stupid mind that came up with this, was that a brother in the past, I believe in the 90s, had passed away from drinking too much at, some sort of event. And so it was like, this is the one night where a lot of eating, a lot of drinking to the point of throwing up. And then at the end, it's like throughout this quote unquote pledge process, there won't be any forced drinking for that reason. Weird way to kind of teach that lesson for sure. But I can say, like, throughout the rest of any kind of pledge period that I was a part of or saw after, I was done, beyond that point, like, there was no forced drinking or anything like that. Yeah, like the poor imitation of the military stuff. I mean, like some of the stuff, it was referenced or came from movies, popular movies throughout the years that people saw. It was just kind of weird stuff like that.
So I'm trying to remember. You all were pretty honest at the beginning. I always say like the students were like, yep, you got us. And the alum were not. Some showed up, I think, that next weekend and set up beer pong tables around the house, partied around the house just to kind of show, like, FU, F&M.
So on that one, I can speak to that. So I think it was actually probably about a month after, the initial search, and we were kind of just in this, like, I don't know, investigation period or whatever you would call it. And it was not an alumni weekend, but it was maybe spring arts weekend. It was like this concert event that, the school would put on. And then I think a lot of alumni typically come back for that. So what it was, there was a group of guys that were in my fraternity that were a couple years older than me that I knew. Some of their not girlfriends, but girlfriends. They were, a tight friend group. And, they asked me if they could come into, hang out at the house in our basement, just between the, whatever, it might have been 15 of them, hang out, play beer pong, things like that. And you know, the rules definitely didn't allow that. I was asked if they could do that, and transparently, Colette, I don't know if we've ever really talked about this, but I said yes. And my feeling on it was nothing, because they were all of age at that time, nothing really bad was going to happen or was happening at that time. To me, like, them being able to enjoy that experience and relive some of those, you know, memories, at least the good ones, I just felt not like an FU to the school, but I felt that they kind of deserve that. And they, you know, transparently, the person that asked me if they could do this, he asked me several times, "Are you sure?" And I told them yes. So there was that. And then there was one other time where, not at the house, it was another house on West James where there's like backyards that aren't affiliated with the fraternity at all. Mm-hmm. And there was a party there, right, which was allowed at that time. And then the director of fraternity and sorority life took pictures from that. And I remember he brought that to you guys and said that this happened outside of our house, which I remember I vehemently denied, because that part did not. So it was a matter of being honest about what happened, but also kind of checking the people that were looking to pile on to certain things and saying, all of this is true. Like, I'll admit someone was doing an illegal drug in the house, right? So I'm not going to be afraid to admit that there was something else going on. But if it's not true, it's not true. And that's kind of where I wasn't going to stand for that.
No, and I may have been naive, but I believed you about stuff. And I do separate still in my mind, whether it's fair or not, the alumni behavior, and I had a higher expectation of them.
Mm-hmm.
You were a junior in college. You were my student. And I didn't have that same, I didn't owe them anything.
Yeah.
And they may not have known, but I think they did. The alumni were starting to barrage the college.
I just quickly want to make the distinction of like that weekend and the people that like were 2 years older than me that came for that versus like the communications with the school throughout this process that maybe weren't specifically those alumni. You know, I heard those communications weren't helpful or honest, right? So right. I guess just, you know, making a distinction between like those two things. The communications, like, I heard that was not good, and I believe that wasn't helpful at all. Yeah.
Yep. So the chapter was suspended. I don't know if we should kind of fast forwarding through. I will tell you, I was not in a hurry for that outcome. I wasn't worried that more stuff was going to happen in the house, and I didn't want to kick people out of the house and have the house trashed.
Right.
We were close enough to finals. I'm like, let's get through. We have a sort of peace here.
Mm-hmm.
Is it okay to fast forward to...
I think so. Yeah, I mean, there was nothing else there. It was like towards the end of the year, kind of the suspension was announced.
Yeah.
And then we had a meeting with everybody in the fraternity in like an auditorium kind of classroom with everybody involved with the school, as well as someone from Chi Phi National.
That's right.
It's kind of where it was left off, I believe.
Yep. And I wore my lucky outfit, Kurt, which I'm wearing right now. So it was a 4-year suspension, and it was based on what I was being told were like best practices. That you couldn't come back unless there was a live-in manager in the house. And there were all these restrictions put on, which I'm like, okay, we need to do best practices here. But then a year later, I think I did something that pissed you off, and we got on each other's radar again. And I had been meaning to follow up with you all year to like grab coffee. Mm-hmm. And I think I did an interview with the college newspaper. Mm-hmm. And I said something about the alumni, or I can't remember. You called me out. You wrote to me pretty disappointed in what I had said.
Yeah.
Do you even remember that?
I remember that interaction. I don't remember the exact details of that. I think it stems back to what I was saying before, was just like, me being honest about a lot of things, but if I noticed like extra things, like it just didn't feel right. Like I felt like, even though, we were in the wrong, I guess my willingness to be honest about a lot of things, I just wanted to make sure it was kind of staying that way across the board. I don't know, I don't remember exactly what that was, but yeah, I do remember reaching out about
Yep.
that there. Yeah.
Yep, you called me on it, but you were kind enough when I said, can we go have lunch?
Mm-hmm.
And it was right before spring break of COVID, when we would never come back again. It was like, because do you remember we elbow bumped after the lunch? We didn't know, like,
Yeah.
are we supposed to shake hands? I don't think we're supposed to touch each other.
Well, I remember we got cheeseburgers, right? It was at a place called Gus's.
Yep, because Kurt
yeah.
knows that place.
Uh-huh.
I do.
And I was shocked. You were driving a stick shift.
Yeah. Is
First
that good?
up,
Did I get points for that?
I mean, I couldn't drive one. I mean, they're I feel like pretty rare now, but I was just like, wow, that's an interesting detail. So
Yeah, I picked you up. We went, and then I started. That's when I introduced to Kevin this idea. Like, I was like, they do these things called restorative circles,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe we could try that. Maybe there's a chance that the suspension could end early, or we could make peace. And Kevin, I think you were like, Colette, you are delusional that this would work, but whatever. And then we went into lockdown.
mm-hmm.
And the next thing I remember was the night before Thanksgiving, you set up a Zoom call, and you had all these alumni on the Zoom who were ready to play ball.
Mm-hmm.
So what the hell, how did you do that?
So I think there was an email thread between the like older alumni that were still involved, and it kind of ranged how involved they were. It was some people that were just keeping tabs, and maybe throughout like my time in college came back to do like a speech about like their career and things, all the way to someone who was very involved in like the upkeep of the house, and making sure we were keeping it clean, and kind of things like that, right? So it was those characters, and I remember, I don't know if I arranged the first meeting, or we already had a couple meetings at that point, but I remember I was on the thread, maybe not really fully involved, and then kind of after our talk, I brought that to them, and then I think through our talks brought some of these ideas that we discussed, and just the overall possibility of working together, and I think reducing that suspension, because at that time, the 4 years, we heard of fraternities at F&M in the past that had similar lengthy suspensions like that and never made it back. I forget the name of one in particular, but yet they never came back. It was just like an uphill battle, also because everybody graduates that was affiliated with the fraternity after that 4-year period. So hearing all of that, it felt like a death sentence to some. And so I think just, the possibilities there is what I brought forward. And there might have been some initial pushback, or just like, who's this young kid? Like, what does he know? But I will say there was two alumni that were incredibly helpful to kind of get my message across, that, their voices, at least in the initial period, would be listened to a little bit more than mine. And after time, my voice carried more weight, but they were integral in that. One person in particular, during college, helped me get like an internship. Gave me lots of advice for post-grad things. And so, just that relationship that I have with this person, that was one of the bright spots of, these fraternities that sometimes don't have the greatest reputations. That was a part where that's really the good side of it, that there is this connection that everybody has, older people that look to pay it forward. And then I look at it now as years go by, and if there's someone that needs my help that was also in the fraternity, things like that. So I don't remember specific details, but it was a lot of those back and forths, some pushback, trying to get them to wrap their heads around how things work in 2020 with fraternities, colleges, administration versus, the 70s, 80s, 90s, even early 2000s, So, yeah, there was a lot of that there. Trying to think if I'm leaving anything else out. I think what we decided was to get the general agreement from everyone, even the skeptics in the alumni group, and kind of put together a team of the people that, kind of could grasp the reality of where you were in 2020 and, are willing to have a conversation and listen. I remember putting together a team of someone who was, much older, someone who was a little bit older, and then a few people in my years. And I think bringing those different perspectives would help show you and your team that this is across the board, that we kind of have an agreement from everybody, no matter where they are, that we're willing to work together.
Well, you curated the perfect group. They were willing to listen that night and hear my truth, and then devoted unbelievable amounts of time to a restorative circle process that took a couple years, and people having to take ownership for the parts that they played in decades of distrust. Mm-hmm. That we all had a part that we played. And then I will tell you, other groups came forward saying, we want some of that. We want our group to come back. Mm-hmm. And didn't want to do the work, didn't send good diplomats, but you found the right people. So, Kurt, you've heard this long story now.
Yeah. I have questions. Can I ask?
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, I'm so curious because I think about, I've never been involved in, as a college professional, in a situation like this. Typically, I'm meeting with a student who was involved in a situation, and I had that conversation. And I think what strikes me the most is that the burden that you must have felt, because it's not just you walking into a meeting and the outcome impacts you. It impacts your peers, and it impacts decades of alumni. And to be just a junior in college dealing with that, like the weight of it, how do you juggle that with also at the same time trying to finish your degree and do all the things that any other student's doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It helped that I was also on the golf team. It helped a little bit at the time that I actually had a falling out with our coach in the fall season of that year before the fraternity got suspended, and I had a little bit more free time, that there was no spring season. We ended up making amends, and I rejoined the team for the first semester of my senior year before COVID hit. But anyway, yeah, it was a lot mentally to juggle. There was like so many unknowns of course, myself and any sort of disciplinary action there, because you kind of just hear when you're, the fraternity president, there's lots of liability on you for kind of everything that goes on, even if it's kind of not all of you. It's not completely you orchestrating everything. And then also everyone else, their trouble, and then also the alumni and their opinions and their thoughts. It was a lot, thankfully, even though there were some difficult alumni, Colette. The first advice I got from the alumni that were more involved was to come forward and tell the truth.
Really?
Yeah. Did they know what the truth was? I don't know. But that was the first, thing there that I think helped a lot in being able to kind of come forward and do that. Yeah. I mean, it was stressful. Transparently, there were some cigarettes smoked during that time. But, we just took it, I don't know. We just took it day by day. I mentioned I'm half Irish, so emotions, we kind of just suppress those and carry forward. I don't know. We just, we dealt with it as it came along. Yeah, sorry. I wish I had a better answer for you there, but
No.
It's a great question. But yeah, it was kind of just to keep going forward, try not to get too stressed out, control what you can control, don't not go to class just because this other thing is going on, that kind of stuff.
No, that's great.
How did you decide even to run for president. I found those roles so thankless and grueling. They always would send the nice,
Yeah.
I don't know how to describe it, like in some ways some vulnerability was always there. The presidents were good diplomats, but man, they had to take a lot of heat. So why would you even want to do that?
Yeah. I think a little bit. It felt like, I guess, there's different fraternity roles, right? And I remember early on, you were given praise by others or respect by others for contributing to the fraternity and not just being someone that sits around, waits for parties and kind of just takes the quote-unquote benefits of it, right? So there was a little bit of that culture there, which was a good thing. I think in addition to that, like, when I say it felt like something to do, that makes it sound like I just was doing it and didn't really care. For some reason, I cared and kind of wanted to contribute in this way, and it gave me maybe a sense of purpose. I'm a bit of an old soul, so in college, some people are just thinking about what am I doing next weekend. I remember early on, I got really tired of that, and I wanted to do something more. I cared a lot about golf in high school and wanted to become a professional and all that stuff, and then you find yourself playing, Division III, you're a year in, and, you're even though you're starting, you're like, I'm probably not headed to the PGA Tour. So golf kind of, the purpose there kind of fell out, even though I still, enjoyed playing. It wasn't going to be my main, motivator. Neither was the fraternity, but it was something. So I think just taking on that responsibility, having responsibility for something is, what I was looking forward to. And in the later years of college, mentally, I was like starting to be driven crazy, especially when the fraternity was gone. I almost wanted to graduate because it was an opening of like more things to do, trying to conquer the world, doing something like stand-up that I realized that, I really wanted to do. So just having something like that, I took a lot of pride in and gave me some fulfillment at the time, I think is like the main thing.
So Kevin, I'm curious, because I had written down responsibility, and you've said that a couple times. You take on a role like this, and people are throwing these kind of nebulous terms at you, like, responsibility, liability. But then there's that moment when the reality of it intersects with that kind of nebulous concept, and you realize what that liability means, and that you're about to come face to face with it, and you get that phone call. What is that feeling like for you in that moment?
Pretty heart-dropping. Yeah, really heart-dropping, nerve-wracking. Everything comes crashing down. Kind of a good movie comparison. And drugs being involved, that's not the part of the analogy that I'm going for here, but
Yeah.
in Goodfellas, when he goes through that crazy day and the helicopter's following him, it's all this stuff, and he's going up and down, and then in the car, like all the music, the crazy music throughout those different scenes stops, and then it's just a shutdown, and then the cop is outside of the car, and then it's kind of like all over. A little bit of that feeling.
Okay.
Not as intense, right? Because, that was like, that was a lot more serious stuff going on in that movie, but, that kind of feeling, for lack of a better reference. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, we always talk about how do we support students, even in a conduct setting. This just seems to me like it's a next level stress situation. So what support was available to you in those moments?
Yeah. Had some good friends around me, I think. That's another bright spot of the fraternity, despite what was going on there. There was no, hey, Kevin, this is all your fault narrative going on. Everybody was really supportive. They knew that I was at the peak of having to deal with a lot of this stress, so thankfully everybody was pretty supportive there. Of course, there were some probably unhealthy coping habits going on during that time. But yeah, probably those two things, and then I guess some of the, mental resolve I was kind of talking about earlier, of just controlling what you can. I couldn't bang on Colette's door and say, hey, give us a decision already on like what's going on. I knew it was kind of going to be a longer thing, so I'm kind of just having to carry on there in that way. There also, really quickly, Colette, there might have been other support systems that I'm going to. I'm not saying there was none of that in place, but for the personality type that I am, I'm not maybe someone that's going to go to a counselor at a school or anything. And, And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just kind of not how I operate.
I'm only laughing because, that you were feeling like you had to do these things. After you graduated, we started a program where we trained volunteers from the faculty and staff to be advisors for students going through cases. And for something like this, we would have strongly encouraged you. But now that I think back, the on-campus advisor for Chi Phi resigned. Like, I heard that you were hazing, and I am no longer your advisor. And I'm
Wow.
like, oh my God, how did I not encourage that person to not do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we didn't, God, we should have paired you up with somebody, whether you trusted
Well,
them or not.
Yeah. Well, it's okay because if I find success as a comedian and maybe one day get canceled for something, I've got practice now. I've been there before.
Did any of this help you later? Resilience or confidence building? Or right now I'm just feeling guilty, but
No, I mean I would say the fraternity, experience, at least my experience with it, helped a lot with my personal growth. That sounds a little vague, but just to give some specific examples, like I think coming into college, I still am a somewhat introverted person. They say like introverted extrovert, so at least on the surface, until I get to know you and feel a trust there, that's kind of when I can come out and be more animated. But I think it was that times 30 heading into college. And I think, being in that fraternity and then having, when I became president, in meetings, having to speak in front of everyone and coordinate these different things and understand people's different personalities and what was going to motivate, this less rule following fraternity member to kind of do this, whereas I know I can rely on this person for this thing. So I think those skills really went a long way in terms of just my personal growth and also just soft, social skills there. I think going into college, like I was probably really lacking in that area for whatever reason, and I think it helped a lot there. And then, taking that to whatever job interviews or just day to day in my it's helped a lot. In terms of comedy, I'm going to be honest, I don't think there's really any parallels there.
like you gave life to something that then other chapters did. It did build a culture, and I just hold you. The legacy you've left is significant, and you tend to not take a compliment very well.
No,
Horrible. I need you to take that one.
I'm horrible at that. Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, no, it means a lot because like you get caught up in the college bubble, especially as a student for a lot of these different things. And that kind of, I guess, can alter your perception of like what's really important at the end of the day. And then once you kind of get older, and I'm not trying to sound corny here, I'm only 27, but as you kind of just head out into the real world and you're learning, more and more things, you look back at some of the stuff and either caring too much about something or not taking something seriously enough back then, like maybe some of the things that we discussed. It's, I think, healthy to look back on and, a good experience or a good learning experience, to kind of just see that, perspective of things now versus what you see when you look back at them.
I was just going to tell you, like, your chapter did come back a year early from what was supposed to be a 4-year suspension. And now that all seems really petty compared to what you just said about the bigger picture.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's great to see. I saw they had an event recently, a few weekends ago, and, the house was reopened and all that. So I wasn't able to attend, unfortunately, but seeing the people that I know that were, helpful in the process there, like, pictures and stuff, and seeing that it, still means a lot to them, and they're heavily involved was a good thing, and pretty cool to be a part of that.
They've recruited some wonderful men. I still, working with the alumni, it's challenging, but it's in a really good place.
That's great.
I think you'll be really proud when you come back.
Yeah, it's great to hear.
Kurt, any final thoughts?
Oh, but I think this is probably my favorite episode. I mean, it's great to have the perspective of a former student, but also just the story and the outcome is pretty phenomenal. So I appreciate you coming and sharing this with us.
No, thank
Kevin?
you for having me. I'm glad I didn't bomb. This is, I guess, sounds like this was a good one.
It was. Where could people find you if they're interested in your comedy?
Sure, everything is Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. So just search my name there, and hopefully you'll find it. Unfortunately, I hate being on my phone. I hate being on social media. If I didn't do comedy, I would probably get rid of it altogether. But we're required to, kind of post a lot, these days just to kind of get any sort of, traction and following and all that. So, yeah, I post a decent bit of content on there. So, yeah, any of those platforms kind of, try to post somewhat regularly there.
Nice.
Kevin,
Outro.
thanks for being on Misbehavior. We encourage everybody to like and subscribe, comment on this episode, tell us your own stories of restorative practices, and we will see you next time.
Bye, folks.
Bye-bye. Misbehavior is written and produced by Colette Shaw and Kurt Doan. Theme music was written and performed by Kevin McGloin from incompetech.com. You can contact Ms. Behavior at msbehaviorcollege@gmail.com. That's msbehaviorcollege@gmail.com.